In the opening phase of the full-scale war, the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet pressed its advantage at sea. Cruise missile salvos struck airfields, depots, and energy nodes, ports were choked, and amphibious probes were tested along Ukraine's coast. The fleet's presence projected constant pressure on coastal cities and threatened to sever critical lines of trade. Yet within months, the maritime balance began to shift as Ukraine combined surprise, coordination, and rapidly evolving unmanned technology to impose losses few had anticipated. Snake Island became an early emblem of that turn. The rocky outcrops, small but strategically placed along vital sea lanes, fell to Russia after intense bombardment, with the cruiser Moskva acting as an anchor for the operation. A brief, defiant radio exchange from Ukrainian guards ricocheted around the world, crystallizing the mood of resistance. The story did not end there. Weeks later, an anti-ship missile strike sent Moskva to the bottom, an event that reverberated far beyond the Black Sea. The broader contest for Snake Island continued through raids, fires, and repeated strikes. Ukrainian special teams risked insertions under fire, and not every aircraft made it home. The loss of an evacuation helicopter underscored the cost. But the cumulative pressure proved decisive. Russian forces eventually abandoned the outposts, ceding a symbolic and tactical position. Elsewhere, the war at sea continued to evolve. In Berdyansk, a large amphibious landing ship was destroyed at the pier and other vessels were damaged, complicating the use of occupied ports as staging hubs. And confronted with mounting risks near the littoral, Russia drew its warships closer to layered air defenses in Crimea and to the relative safety of Novorossiysk. Those moves constrained operations and increased reliance on defended harbors and shore-based systems. Ukrainian anti-ship missiles, limited by range and quantity, could not by themselves dictate the tempo everywhere along the coast. The search for an asymmetric answer accelerated. The model had already emerged on land, small, inexpensive drones that could be fielded in numbers and adapted quickly. Translated to the sea, the concept became the unmanned surface vessel FAST, low-slung boats with sensors, guidance, and compact payloads built from commercial components. Their power lay not in sophistication alone, but in the way they forced an adversary to defend everywhere all the time. Even when intercepted, they tied up patrol boats, helicopters, shore batteries, and electronic warfare units. When they broke through, they inflicted damage that sent major ships to dry dock for lengthy repairs. Investigations into wreckage suggested just how accessible the technology had become. Elements appeared to trace back to civilian watercraft and off-the-shelf systems rather than bespoke military supply chains. The Crimean Bridge, a centerpiece of Russian logistics and a political symbol in its own right, became a prominent target. In two separate, high-profile incidents, months apart, Ukraine dealt significant damage to the roadway spans. The first blast sent shockwaves through Russian media and officialdom, not least because of the date's symbolism. The second operation, employing sea-launched unmanned means, again disrupted traffic and necessitated large-scale repairs. While the rail line continued to operate at intervals, the impact on road movement complicated resupply and forced costly mitigations. By late October 2022, the maritime campaign reached into Sevastopol itself. In a coordinated attack on the 29th, unmanned systems penetrated the harbor and damaged multiple vessels, including the frigate elevated to flagship status after Moskva's loss. Initial statements from Russian officials dismissed the reports, but the flood of video from multiple angles and eventual acknowledgments told a more complicated story. The images captured a new kind of battle. Low silhouettes skimming the surface, wakes cutting through the dawn light, patrol boats pivoting sharply to interpose themselves, and helicopters firing in short, controlled bursts. Chaos and confusion were visible too, sailors scrambling, near collisions, and hurried small arms fire that sometimes ricocheted perilously close to the shoreline. Interceptors did find their marks at times, and at least a few drones detonated short of their targets. But every such interception required time, munitions, and coordination, costs that accumulated day after day. Economics amplified the tactical effect. Large surface combatants are complex and expensive to build, crew, and maintain. By contrast, unmanned craft can be assembled and iterated quickly at a fraction of the price. Even if a significant share of drones is lost en route, a small number of successful strikes can bend a fleet's behavior, forcing warships to disperse, shelter behind breakwaters, sail under the cover of darkness, or avoid contested waters altogether. In practical terms, this meant fewer shore bombardments, longer transit times, and a heavier defensive posture that consumed resources without projecting the same offensive reach. Concrete episodes illustrated the point. A Russian missile boat was engaged at close range by several maritime drones in rapid succession. The cumulative damage proved catastrophic, and the vessel later sank. In another case, a modern reconnaissance and communications ship tasked with linking fleet elements and supporting electronic missions was struck at sea. Although official statements claimed the attack had been repelled without effect, subsequent imagery indicated significant damage and a lengthy stay in repair. These outcomes mattered not only for the tally of ships, but for what they signaled, that high-value assets could be hunted even under layers of protection. This adaptation, cycle, build, test, learn, refine, played out in public view. Footage from both sides became part of the narrative. Helmet cams and cockpit video, harbor security feeds, and the stark aftermath of explosions filmed from distant rooftops. Celebrations after an interception sat uneasily beside scenes of damaged hulls listing at the pier. For analysts, the feed of material offered a living laboratory. For sailors on either side, it meant a war conducted under constant observation where a single lapse could be broadcast worldwide within hours. The broader strategic effect has been unmistakable. The Black Sea theater no longer belongs to large surface ships by default. Operating close to Ukraine's coast now demands escorts, air cover, and an acceptance of persistent risk. Ports once treated as sanctuaries have turned into defended fortresses, their entrances guarded, their approaches patrolled, their waters scanned by radar and optics day and night. Even then, gaps remain windows of weather, routes hugged to the coastline, and ships caught in transition. Unmanned systems exploit those gaps relentlessly, and every adaptation by defenders spurs a counter-adaptation by attackers. None of this diminishes the war's human cost, nor does it change the laws of physics at sea. Storms still ground small craft, navigation still matters, and even a powerful drone must be guided, supplied, and controlled. But the center of gravity has shifted. Where once a handful of major vessels could dominate the littoral with relative impunity, they now face a swarm of small, intelligent threats that can be fielded in numbers and upgraded in months rather than years. That dynamic explains why Russian units pulled back from exposed waters, why convoy tactics have returned to relevance, and why shipyards on both sides have become as important as any missile battery. Looking back at this arc from the early salvos and the fall of Snake Island, through the sinking of Moskva, the destruction in Berdyansk, the bridge incidents, and the harbor raid in Sevastopol, a pattern emerges. Ukraine leveraged ingenuity, speed, and an openness to new tools to chip away at a larger fleet's freedom of action. Russia, for its part, shifted to a more defensive footing and invested heavily in countermeasures, buying time and space but at a growing opportunity cost. The contest is not static. It is a moving front shaped by iteration, improvisation, and the relentless pressure of a long war. That is how the tide in the Black Sea began to turn, not through a single decisive blow, but through many small ones, delivered with creativity and persistence, till the map of what was safe and what was possible at sea had to be redrawn.